The steam rose from the ground like breath from a sleeping giant, curling white against the endless white of the landscape. We had been walking for 6 days through snow that never melted, through cold that bit through every layer of fur and hide, when Malik raised his hand and we all stopped. The hunters stood motionless, reading something in the air I couldn't yet perceive, and then I smelled it. A hint of sulfur, of warmth, of something impossible existing in this frozen world. My name is James, and I was there that winter morning when the ancient hunters found the hot spring. I was the scholar among them, the naturalist from England who had come north with notebooks and theories, thinking I could study these people the way I studied plants and animals. I had thought observation was understanding. I was about to learn how wrong I was. If you're drawn to stories of discovery and the wisdom that exists in places we least expect, please subscribe. These tales from the edge of the world need witnesses, and your support ensures they survive for those who need to hear them. The smell of sulfur grew stronger as Malik led us forward, his weathered face showing neither excitement nor surprise. He had known we were close to something, though I couldn't understand how. At 60 years old, he was the eldest of our hunting party and its natural leader, a man who spoke rarely, but whose every word carried the weight of decades spent in this unforgiving land. Behind him walked Siku, a woman of perhaps 40, whose strength was evident in every movement. She carried as much weight as any man, moved with the same sure-footed grace across treacherous ice, and possessed knowledge of the land's rhythms that made her invaluable. Her eyes were constantly scanning, always alert, always reading signs in snow and sky that I was still learning to see. What I didn't know then was that this hot spring would become more than just a curiosity, more than just a warm place in a cold land. It would become a teacher, showing me truths about survival and community, and the ways that humans adapt to impossible conditions. It would transform everything I thought I understood about science and observation and the relationship between people and their environment. We crested a small rise, and there it was. A pool perhaps 20 feet across, its surface sending steady columns of steam into the frigid air. The ground around it was bare, actual bare earth visible in a landscape where snow covered everything. Plants grew at its edges, green and alive despite the brutal cold that should have killed them months ago. "This is impossible," I breathed, pulling out my notebook with hands that shook from cold and excitement. "The temperature here must be far below freezing, yet this water remains liquid, even hot enough to steam." "Not impossible," Malik said quietly, his first words in hours. "Just rare. The earth remembers warmth, even when the sky forgets it. Here, that memory rises to the surface." His words were poetry, not science. But, as I would learn, sometimes poetry captures truth that science misses. Malik raised his hand again, and we all stopped at the edge of the spring. He knelt, touching the ground with reverence that seemed strange for simply finding water. Then he spoke words in his language, prayers perhaps, or acknowledgments, or something for which English had no equivalent. When he stood, he looked at me directly. "We camp here tonight. Tomorrow we talk about why you've come with us, scholar man, what you hope to learn, what you think knowledge is." There was challenge in his tone, but also something else. Invitation, maybe, or warning, or both. We made camp as the weak northern sun began its descent toward the horizon. Anu, Malik's grandson and the youngest of our hunters at 22, showed me how to build a shelter that took advantage of the spring's warmth. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing this since childhood, and his patience with my clumsy attempts was genuine rather than merely polite. "You learn quick," he said as we worked, for a Southerner. "Most who come from warm places can't stop shivering long enough to think." "I'm stubborn," I admitted. Possibly foolish, but determined to understand this land. "Understanding and surviving aren't the same thing," he observed. "But maybe you'll learn the difference, if you live long enough." His tone was light, almost joking, but the warning was real. As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, we gathered around a fire built near the spring. The heat from both fire and water created a pocket of relative comfort in the vast cold. We ate dried meat and a thick soup that Siku prepared from ingredients she had carried, and slowly the others began to relax around me. There was Tuluk, perhaps 50 years old, who had been skeptical of allowing me to join this hunting trip. He sat across the fire, his eyes still watching me with doubt, wondering if I would prove useful or merely troublesome. Beside him sat old Inukpak, ancient beyond reckoning, his face so weathered it looked carved from the same stone that lay beneath the snow. He was the keeper of stories, the one who remembered when others forgot, and I had heard him speak exactly 3 words since we began this journey. And there was little Mickey, Siku's daughter, perhaps 7 years old, who shouldn't have been on this trip but was here anyway because, as Siku had explained simply, she must learn, and learning happens in living, not in stories by safe fires. Mickey sat beside me now, her small face serious as she ate her soup. "You smell different," she observed with the directness of children. "I suppose I do," I agreed. "Different food, different soap, different life." "Will you learn to smell like us?" she asked. The question was more profound than she knew. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I'm trying to learn many things. Perhaps that's one of them." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and returned her attention to her soup. What happened next would set the pattern for everything that followed. Tuluk spoke, his voice carrying across the fire. "Why are you here, scholar? What do you want from us?" It was the question I had known would come eventually. The question I had been preparing to answer since I left England 6 months ago. But sitting there, surrounded by people who had shown me more kindness than I had earned, mere preparation felt insufficient. "I came to study," I began carefully, "to observe how people survive in conditions that seem impossible, to document your methods, your knowledge, your ways of living with this land rather than against it." "Study," Tuluk repeated, making the word sound small. "Like we are animals? Like we are specimens for your books?" "No," I said quickly, then paused, forcing myself to be honest. "Or yes, that's how I thought of it at first. But I'm learning that was wrong. You're not subjects for study. You're teachers I'm not worthy of." The silence that followed my words was weighted. Malik's expression was unreadable. Siku had stopped eating, watching me with eyes that seemed to see through my skin to whatever truth lay beneath. Even Mickey had paused, sensing the importance of the moment. Finally, Inukpak spoke. His voice was like wind over old ice, quiet but carrying. "Then learn properly. Not with your eyes and your book, with your hands and your heart. Live as we live. Work as we work. Fail as you must fail until you learn not to fail. Then, if you survive, perhaps you will understand something worth writing." It was the longest speech I had heard from him, and it hit me with the force of revelation. He was right. My notebooks, my observations, my careful documentation, they were all just surfaces. They showed what people did, but not why it mattered. They recorded actions, but not meanings. "I'll try," I said quietly. "I'll learn properly. I promise." Malik nodded once, slowly. "Good. Then tomorrow we begin your real education. Tonight we rest. And Inukpak will tell a story about this spring, about why it matters, about what it teaches those wise enough to listen." The old man settled back against his pack, his ancient eyes reflecting firelight, and began to speak. "Long ago," Inukpak said, his voice taking on the cadence of storytelling, "before our grandfathers' grandfathers walked this land, there was a winter that would not end. The snow fell and fell. The cold deepened. The animals fled south. The people starved. Many died. Those who remained prayed to the spirits of earth and sky, asking for mercy, for warmth, for some sign that the world had not forgotten them." Young Miki leaned forward, captivated despite having surely heard this story before. I found myself equally entranced, not just by the tale, but by the way Inukpak told it. Not as history or myth, but as something that existed in the space between both. "The spirits heard the prayers," he continued. "But they did not send the sun. They did not melt the snow. Instead, they taught the people to look beneath the surface. They said, 'Warmth exists even in the coldest times. Life persists even when it seems dead. You must learn to find what is hidden, to trust what you cannot see, to understand that the world is deeper than the snow that covers it.' And so the people searched. They learned to read the land for signs of hidden warmth. They found springs like this one, places where the earth's deep memory of summer rises to meet winter's forgetting. They built their winter camps around these springs. They survived. And they learned that survival is not about fighting the cold, but about finding warmth wherever it exists, in whatever form it takes." He paused, his eyes moving to me specifically. "The spring teaches this. What you see on the surface is not all that exists. What appears lifeless may be merely waiting. What seems impossible may be simply hidden. The wise hunter learns to trust his deeper senses, to look beyond the obvious, to understand that the world is full of secrets that reveal themselves only to those humble enough to search for them." The story settled over us like a blanket. In the fire's warmth and the spring's heat and the story's wisdom, I felt something shift inside me. This was not just a tale for entertainment. It was a teaching, a philosophy, a map for navigating a world more complex than surfaces suggested. "Thank you," I said quietly to Inukpak. He nodded once, then closed his eyes, done speaking for the night. We slept in shifts, keeping watch against cold and predators and the thousand dangers that existed in this landscape. When my turn came to keep the fire fed, I sat alone in the vast silence, listening to the wind, to the breathing of sleeping people, to the quiet sounds of the spring. Constant, warm, impossible, and yet undeniably real. I thought about England, about the university, about the colleagues who had thought me mad for coming north, about my neat theories of human adaptation and environmental pressures, about how much of what I thought I knew was built on observations made from comfortable distance, never tested by actual experience. I thought about Inukpak's story, about warmth hidden beneath snow, about the importance of looking deeper than surfaces, about learning to trust senses I had been trained to dismiss in favor of measurable data. And I realized that if I truly wanted to understand these people, this place, this way of living, I would have to become a different kind of scholar. One who participated rather than merely observed. one who learned by doing rather than just by watching. One who understood that some knowledge couldn't be written down because it existed in muscles and instincts, and the kind of wisdom that only comes from experience. When morning came, gray and cold despite the spring's warmth, Malik approached me with a proposition. "You want to learn," he said without preamble. "Then learn properly. We stay here 5 days. Use the spring, hunt the area, prepare for the journey home. You work with us. Do what we do. Ask questions when you don't understand. But work first. Question later." "Agreed?" "Agreed," I said immediately. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Then your first lesson begins now. Anu will teach you to fish through ice. It is harder than it looks. You will fail many times. Try not to get frustrated. Learning requires patience." "And humility," Siku added, approaching with Mickey beside her, "which scholars sometimes lack." She was smiling, but the point was made. I bowed slightly, acknowledging the hit. "I'll try to be humble," I promised. "No," Malik corrected. "You'll try to learn. Humility will come whether you want it or not. The ice doesn't care about your education. The fish don't care about your theories. They are what they are. You must become what you need to be to succeed with them. That's the lesson." And with that simple statement, my education truly began. Anu led me to the spring, where the warmth created a zone where ice was thinner than elsewhere. He carried tools, a long spear with a barbed tip, a short ice chisel, a woven net made from what looked like dried plant fibers. "First, we find where fish gather," he explained, kneeling on the ice near the spring's edge. "They come here for warmth, like everything living. We're not hunting them in the whole frozen lake. We're hunting them in the small space where life is possible. Understand the difference?" I did. It was the same principle as Inukpak's story. Life concentrates where conditions allow it, and the wise hunter learns to recognize those places. Anu spent an hour teaching me to read the ice. How thickness changed with distance from the spring. How fish moving beneath created subtle patterns in the ice's surface. How shadow and light played differently over water that contained life versus water that was empty. Then he began chiseling a hole, his movements precise and economical. "Never use more energy than necessary," he instructed. "The cold steals warmth from your body constantly. Every extra movement, every wasted effort, every moment of unnecessary work brings you closer to exhaustion. And in this land, exhaustion kills." I watched how he worked. Efficient, focused, conserving energy without seeming to think about it. This was knowledge written into his body through years of practice. Knowledge I would have to learn through repetition and failure. When the hole was complete, he handed me the spear. "Now you watch. Wait. The fish will come. When you see one, strike fast. Don't think. Don't hesitate. Trust your instinct." I knelt beside the hole, spear ready, and waited. The cold seeped through my furs, through my layers, into my bones. My eyes watered from wind and concentration. My muscles cramped from staying motionless. And I saw nothing. No fish, no movement. Just dark water reflecting gray sky. After an hour, Anu gently took the spear from my stiff hands. "You're looking too hard," he said. "Trying too hard. The fish sense your tension. You must be calm, patient, empty of wanting. Only then will they come." He demonstrated, becoming still in a way that seemed to transcend mere physical motionlessness. His breathing slowed. His face relaxed. He became part of the ice, part of the landscape, no longer a separate thing to be avoided. Within minutes, he struck. A fish thrashed on his spear, silver and fighting. He pulled it through the hole with practiced ease and handed it to me. "Now you try again," he said. "But this time, don't try. Just be. Wait without waiting. Watch without watching. Exist without pushing existence away." His instructions sounded like riddles. But as the hours passed and I kept failing, I began to understand. He was teaching me to get out of my own way, to stop forcing and start allowing, to understand that hunting wasn't about aggressive pursuit, but about becoming part of the natural pattern of predator and prey. By midday, I caught my first fish. It was small. My technique was terrible, and I nearly lost it in my excitement. But I had done it, and the pride I felt was different from academic pride. More honest, more earned, more real. "Good," Aniu said simply. "Now you know the beginning. In 5 years you might be adequate at this. In 10, possibly good. I've been doing this since I was 5 years old. I'm still learning." His words were humbling, but not unkind. They simply stated reality, that mastery took time, that expertise required dedication, that respect for the difficulty of what these people did every day was essential. That evening, we ate the fish I had caught along with those Aniu had caught, and others that Malik and Tuluk had brought back from hunting on the ice. The meal was communal. Everyone's contribution valued equally, regardless of skill or quantity. My small fish was treated with the same respect as Malik's larger catch. "The meal is better because you helped provide it," Siku told me as we ate. "Not because your fish was large or your skill was great, but because you participated, because you were part of the work. That's what community means. Everyone contributes what they can, and the sum becomes enough for all." Her words struck deep. In my academic world, value was individual. Your discoveries, your papers, your recognition. Here, value was communal. Success was shared. And somehow, that created something stronger than individual achievement ever could. As darkness fell and we gathered again around the fire, Inukpak told another story. This one was about a hunter who thought he knew everything, who refused to learn from others, who believed his ways were best. The hunter died, of course, frozen alone on the ice, his expertise useless because he had never learned to ask for help, to accept teaching, to understand that survival required community. The moral was clear, and I didn't miss the fact that it was aimed at me. Or rather, at who I had been when I first arrived in this land. The scholar who thought observation was enough, who believed book learning was superior to lived experience, who had come to study but not to participate. That person was dying, frozen by exposure to reality. And someone new was beginning to emerge, someone who understood, however dimly, that true knowledge required humility, participation, and the willingness to be transformed by what you sought to understand. Over the following days, I learned constantly. Siku taught me about weather, showing me how to read clouds and wind, how to sense coming storms before they arrived, how to interpret the behavior of animals and the quality of light. Tuluk, his skepticism gradually easing, taught me about tools, how to maintain them in extreme cold, how to sharpen them properly, how to respect them as partners in survival rather than mere objects. Even little Mickey taught me, showing me games that were actually disguised lessons in observation and memory. She would hide objects in the snow and challenge me to find them, teaching me to see the subtle disturbances that marked something's presence. She would point out tracks and make me identify them, correcting me gently when I guessed wrong. "You're getting better," she told me on our 4th day at the spring. "You don't look lost anymore. You look like you're starting to belong." Her words meant more to me than any academic honor I had ever received. But the greatest lesson came on our last full day at the spring, when disaster nearly struck, and I had to choose between observation and participation, between recording what happened and being part of what happened. It started with Anyu. He had gone onto the ice alone, checking fish traps we had set the day before. I was near the spring, sketching the plants that grew at its edge, falling back into old habits of documentation. I heard a sound that didn't belong, a crack, sharp and clear, carrying across the silence. I looked up and saw Anyu standing motionless, his face pale. The ice beneath him had cracked. Not catastrophically, not yet. But the warning was clear. Malik was already moving before I fully understood what I was seeing. He grabbed a long pole and began making his way toward Anyu, spreading his weight, testing each step, moving with deliberate care. "James," Siku called sharply. "The rope, bring it." I stood frozen for a moment. My notebook was in my hand. Part of me wanted to record what happened. Document this example of ice failure and rescue technique. Write down the methods they used so I could study them later. But Anyu was in danger. Real danger. Immediate danger. And Siku needed the rope. Now. I dropped the notebook and ran. The rope was coiled near my shelter. I grabbed it and ran back to where Siku waited at the ice's edge. She took it without comment, playing it out as Malik got closer to Anyu. "When I signal," she told me, "you help me pull. Don't jerk, don't panic, steady pressure, understand?" "Yes," I managed, my heart hammering. Malik reached Anyu and tossed him one end of the rope. Anyu caught it and wrapped it around his body just as the ice gave another warning crack. Malik began backing away, using the pole to spread his weight. "Now," Siku said calmly. We pulled. Steady. Even. Trying to help Malik bring Anyu back without adding sudden force that might break the compromised ice. Other hands joined us. Tuluk, Inukpak, even young Mickey adding her small strength. Slowly, impossibly slowly, Anyu moved backward. The ice cracked again. Once. Twice. Water showed through the cracks, dark and deadly. But Anyu kept coming. Malik kept guiding. And we kept pulling. Finally, Anyu reached thicker ice, then shore, then solid ground. We all collapsed, breathing hard, hands cramped from gripping rope. Anyu sat shaking, not from cold, but from reaction. Mickey went to him immediately, pressing against his side, her silent presence offering comfort. Siku checked him over with practiced hands, ensuring he wasn't injured, and Malik turned to me. "You did well," he said simply. "You chose correctly." I understood what he meant. I had chosen participation over observation, being part of the community over documenting it, acting over analyzing. I had chosen right. That night, as we packed for departure the next morning, Inukpak called me over. He handed me something, a small carving made from walrus ivory. It depicted a spring with steam rising from it. "You learned today," he said. "Not everything, not even most things, but something important. You learned that knowledge without action is empty, that understanding without involvement is hollow, that true wisdom comes from living, not just watching. Keep this," he continued. "Remember the spring. Remember that warmth exists in cold places if you know how to find it. Remember that life persists even when it seems impossible. Remember that the deepest truths are often hidden beneath surfaces, waiting for those humble enough and brave enough to search for them. I accepted the carving with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you," I managed, "for everything, for teaching me, for accepting me, for showing me how little I actually knew." "Oh, you still know very little," Inukpak said with the ghost of a smile. "But now you know very little. That's wisdom. That's the beginning of real learning." We left the hot spring the next morning as the sun rose, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. I looked back once and saw the steam still rising, a promise of warmth in the endless cold, a reminder that the world is always more than it appears. What I didn't know then was that this was only the beginning, that I would spend years with these people, learning their ways, becoming part of their community, transforming from scholar to student to participant to, eventually, something like family. The journey back to the main camp took 8 days. Winter was deepening, the days growing shorter, the cold intensifying. But I moved differently now, more efficiently, more confidently, reading the land with eyes that were beginning to see what had been invisible before. Anyu and I walked together most days, and he continued my education. He taught me about ice, how to read its thickness by sound, how to understand the difference between old ice and new ice, how to sense weakness before it became danger. He taught me about snow, the different types, their properties, how to use them for shelter or water or insulation. He taught me about silence, how to move through it, how to use it, how to find peace in its immensity. "You're thinking less now," he observed one afternoon as we crossed a frozen lake. "In the beginning, I could see you thinking about everything, analyzing, judging. Now you're just doing. That's better." "I'm still thinking," I admitted, "but differently. I'm thinking with my body now, not just my mind." "Yes," he agreed. "That's the change. The mind is useful, but the body knows things the mind can't learn. The body understands cold and hunger and fatigue in ways the mind only theorizes about. You're learning to trust your body's knowledge. That's progress." We encountered other hunting parties on our return journey. Each time, there was a ritual exchange of information, where they had been, what they had seen, what conditions were like, where game might be found. These exchanges weren't casual conversations. They were survival information shared freely, because everyone understood that knowledge kept people alive. I noticed how Malik participated in these exchanges. He was generous with information, never holding back details that might help others. But he also listened carefully, absorbing what others shared, adding their knowledge to his own mental map of the territory. "Why do you share so freely?" I asked him one evening after such an exchange. "In my world, people hoard information. They guard their discoveries. They compete with each other." Malik looked at me as if I had said something incomprehensible. "Why would anyone do that? Information that helps me survive might also help them survive. Their survival helps my survival. We are all connected. When one person succeeds, we all become stronger. When one person fails, we all become more vulnerable." "But what about individual achievement?" I pressed. "Individual recognition? What good is recognition if you're dead?" Malik asked simply. "What value is individual achievement if your community dies? We succeed together or fail together. There is no other way. The land doesn't care about your individual glory. It only cares whether you're skilled enough, smart enough, cooperative enough to stay alive." His words were a repudiation of everything I had been taught about science and academia, and the importance of individual contribution. But they also rang with a truth I couldn't deny. These people survived where others died, because they prioritized community over individual, cooperation over competition, shared knowledge over proprietary information. As we approached the main camp, I felt both excitement and trepidation. What would the larger community think of me? Would I be accepted or merely tolerated? Would I be allowed to stay and continue learning? Or would this have been just a brief introduction before being sent back to my own world? The camp was larger than I expected. Perhaps 80 people living in structures built partially into the earth, designed to preserve heat and withstand brutal winds. Smoke rose from multiple dwellings. Dogs barked. Children played. Life continued in this harsh place with a normalcy that seemed miraculous. Our arrival was greeted with quiet joy. Families welcomed back their people. Food was immediately shared. We were brought into a large communal space where the entire community could gather, and Malik gave a report of our journey, where we had been, what we had found, what conditions were like. When he mentioned the hot spring, there was general interest but not surprise. Several elders nodded as if confirming something they already knew. This was how knowledge worked here, not hoarded or hidden, but shared freely so everyone benefited. Then Malik said something that surprised me. "We bring someone new, James, from the South. He came to study us. He's learning instead to be one of us. I recommend we allow him to stay the winter, to learn properly, to become part of our community if he proves worthy." There was silence as people looked at me. Evaluating, judging, deciding, an old woman stood. She must have been 80 if she was a day, her face so weathered it looked like wind-carved stone. Her eyes, though, were sharp and clear. "Does he work?" she asked Malik. "He's learning," Malik replied. "Does he share?" "He does." "Does he ask questions to learn or to judge?" "To learn." The old woman nodded slowly. "Then he may stay. But he must understand. If he stays winter, he becomes one of us. Not a visitor, not an observer. One of us with all that means. Both the privileges and the responsibilities." She turned to me. "Do you understand?" I stood, knowing this was important. "I'm beginning to understand, and I accept. I want to learn. I want to become part of this community. I'll work as hard as I can. I'll contribute what I'm able. I'll learn what you're willing to teach." "Good," the old woman said. "I am Nuna. I lead this community with Malik and 3 others. You will work with me tomorrow. I'll show you what's expected, and I'll decide if you truly mean what you say." It was clear the interview was over. I had been given a chance, but now I had to prove myself worthy of it. That night, I was given a space in one of the dwellings, a small area near the entrance, the coldest spot, but still warmer than outside. The family who hosted me, a couple named Kiviuk and Panika with 3 children, treated me with cautious courtesy. Not warm, not cold, waiting to see what kind of person I would prove to be. The next morning, Nuna woke me before dawn. "Come," she said simply. "Work begins." I followed her into the cold morning air. She led me to a work area where several women were already busy processing animal skins. The work was difficult, physical, and required skills I didn't possess. "You'll learn this," Nuna said, handing me a scraping tool. "It's tedious, it's tiring. Your hands will hurt, but it's necessary. The skins keep us alive. Every skin properly processed is the difference between warmth and cold. between life and death in deep winter. Pay attention. She demonstrated the technique, how to hold the tool, what angle to use, how much pressure to apply. Then she stepped back and watched as I attempted to replicate it. I was terrible. My strokes were uneven, my pressure inconsistent. I worked far too slowly and achieved far too little. After an hour, my hands cramped, my shoulders ached, and I had barely completed a fraction of what the women working beside me had accomplished. But I kept working, and Nuna watched without comment, her face unreadable. By midday, my hands were blistered, my whole body hurt. I wanted to stop, to rest, to complain. But the other women showed no signs of stopping, so I continued. Finally, Nuna called a break. We ate dried meat and drank warm broth, and I noticed the other women watching me with less hostility than before. Not quite acceptance, but acknowledgement that I was trying. "You're slow," Nuna observed, "but you don't complain. That's good. Complaining changes nothing and wastes energy. You'll get faster as your hands learn the work. For now, keeping at it is enough." The afternoon was more of the same, more scraping, more pain, more slow progress. By evening, I had completed exactly 3 skins. The woman working beside me, her name was Arnak, had completed 15. But when the work was done and we cleaned our tools, Arnak nodded to me. Just once. But it felt like approval. That night, as I lay in my sleeping space nursing my blistered hands, young Mickey came and sat beside me. She held a small bowl containing some kind of salve. "Mother says to put this on your hands," she said, handing it to me. "It'll help them heal faster. Tomorrow will hurt less." "Thank you," I managed. She started to leave, then turned back. "You did good today. Nuna doesn't say it, but she was impressed. She expected you to quit. Most Southerners do. They think the work is beneath them. But you kept going. That matters." After she left, I lay in the darkness, listening to the breathing of the family around me, to the wind outside, to the 1,000 small sounds of the camp settling for night. I thought about my old life, my laboratory, my books, my comfortable routine. This life was harder in every measurable way, more physical, more demanding, more uncertain, but it was also more real, more honest, more connected to what mattered. I was changing. The person who had arrived here months ago, that careful scholar with his notebooks and his theories, was becoming someone different. Someone who knew how to fish through ice and scrape skins and value community over individual achievement. Someone who was learning that the deepest knowledge comes not from observation but from participation. The winter deepened. The days grew shorter. The cold intensified. And I kept learning. Kiviuk taught me about shelter, how to maintain warmth, how to manage ventilation, how to create comfort in cramped spaces shared with multiple people. Panika taught me about food preservation, about rationing, about the 1,000 decisions that went into ensuring everyone had enough to survive until spring. Their children taught me games that were actually lessons in cooperation and resource management. Even play here had purpose, preparing the young for the responsibilities they would someday carry. But the greatest challenge came about 6 weeks into my stay, when a child fell ill. Not Mickey, thank God, but a boy named Amaruk, perhaps 10 years old. He developed a fever that wouldn't break, a cough that sounded like death in his small chest. The community's healer, an old man named Aviak, did everything he knew. He used herbs and rituals and techniques passed down through generations. But Amaruk got worse. I had medicine in my pack. Modern medicine brought from England. Quinine that might help with fever. Tonics that might ease the cough. But I had been hesitant to offer it. Worried about seeming to claim my knowledge was superior. Worried about offending Aviak. Worried about disrupting what I was learning by imposing my own practices. But Amaruk was dying. Finally, I approached Aviak. I have medicine, I told him, from my country, different from yours. I don't know if it will work, but I'm willing to try if you'll allow it. He studied me for a long moment. I couldn't read his expression. Then he said, "Will it help?" "It might. I can't promise, but it might." "Then use it. I care about the boy, not about pride. If your medicine works where mine has failed, that's good. If it doesn't work, at least we tried everything." His humility shamed me. How many times had I refused to consider knowledge that didn't come from approved sources? How often had I dismissed techniques that weren't validated by my academic standards? I treated Amaruk with everything I had. Aviak watched closely, asking questions, learning my methods even as I had learned his. We worked together, his herbs to ease symptoms, my medicine to fight infection, both of us monitoring the boy constantly. For 3 days, the outcome was uncertain. Amaruk's fever would break only to return. His breathing would ease only to worsen. We took turns sitting with him, keeping him comfortable, keeping his parents reassured that we were doing everything possible. On the 4th day, the fever broke and stayed broken. Amaruk's breathing eased. Color returned to his face. He would live. The relief in the community was palpable. But what struck me was how Aviak responded. He immediately asked me to teach him about the medicines I had used. Not to replace his own knowledge, but to add to it. To create something larger than either tradition alone. "Knowledge is knowledge," he said simply. "It doesn't matter where it comes from. What matters is whether it helps people. Your medicine helped Amaruk. Therefore, it's good. I want to understand it so I can use it again if needed." We spent weeks working together after that. I learned his herbal preparations. He learned my medical techniques. We discussed treatments and shared theories and created something new, a hybrid practice that drew from both traditions. And I realized this was what I had been missing in my old life. The arrogance to think my way was the only way. The rigidity to dismiss anything that didn't fit my preconceptions. The pride that valued being right over being helpful. These people had shown me a better way. They evaluated knowledge by its usefulness, not its source. They honored what worked regardless of where it came from. They were more scientific than my fellow scientists because they cared about results rather than theoretical purity. As winter reached its deepest point, the time when the sun barely rose, when the cold became so intense it hurt to breathe, when every day was a battle against the darkness and the cold, the community came together in ways that seemed almost miraculous. Food was shared with perfect equity. No family was allowed to go hungry while others had plenty. Work was distributed fairly. The strong helped the weak. The healthy supported the sick. The knowledgeable taught the ignorant. And I, the outsider scholar who had come to study these people, found myself fully integrated into the community. I worked alongside everyone else. I contributed what I could. I learned constantly. And slowly, almost without noticing when it happened, I stopped being a visitor and became a member. Old Inukpak noticed. One evening, as we gathered for a communal meal, He caught my eye across the fire and smiled. Later, he approached me. "You smell like us now," he said, echoing Mickey's observation from months ago. "Not just your body, your spirit. You've become one of us. I'm glad." His words brought tears to my eyes that I didn't try to hide. "I'm glad too," I managed. "This community has given me more than I ever gave it. I came to study. I stayed to live. I found home." "Yes," Inukpak agreed. "And now you understand the most important lesson. Home is not a place. It's people. It's connection. It's the bonds we forge and the knowledge we share and the care we show for each other. You found home because you opened yourself to it, because you were willing to change, because you understood that learning means becoming something new." As the winter slowly began to ease, the days growing imperceptibly longer, the quality of light starting to change, I faced a decision. I could leave in spring, return to England, write my papers, publish my observations, claim credit for discovering and documenting this remarkable culture. Or I could stay. The choice seemed obvious, but it wasn't. Staying meant giving up everything from my old life. My position, my reputation, my future in academic circles. It meant accepting that I would become something else. Not a visiting scholar, but a permanent member of a culture I hadn't been born into. It meant choosing connection over recognition, community over individual achievement, living knowledge over written documentation. I talked about it with Anyu one day as we checked fish traps through the ice. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Part of me wants to stay, but part of me feels obligated to return, to share what I've learned, to tell people about this community and its wisdom." Anyu thought about this as he worked. Finally, he said, "You can only truly teach what you've fully learned. If you leave now, you'll write about us as someone who visited, not someone who lived. Your knowledge will be incomplete, your understanding partial. But if you stay not for a season but for years, stay long enough to become truly one of us, then if you eventually decide to leave, your teaching will be real. You'll speak not as an observer but as a participant, not as someone who studied a culture, but as someone who lived it." His wisdom struck deep. He was right. I wasn't ready to teach yet. I had learned much, but I hadn't learned enough. I was changing, but the change wasn't complete. "I'll stay," I decided, "at least for now, at least until I've learned enough to teach properly." Anyu smiled. "Good. I'm glad. You make good company, even if you are still slow at fishing." When I told Malik and Nuna of my decision, they nodded as if they had expected it. "You're welcome here," Nuna said, "for as long as you choose. You've proven yourself. You work hard. You learn well. You contribute without taking more than your share. You're one of us now. Not conditionally. Not temporarily. One of us." Her words felt like a benediction, like a graduation, like the completion of something important. But really, it was just the beginning. Over the following years, and yes, I stayed for years, I became fully integrated into the community. I married Arnak, the woman who had worked beside me that first day of scraping skins. We had children who grew up knowing both their mother's culture and their father's stories about the strange land across the sea. I continued learning. Not just practical skills, though I mastered those eventually, but deeper lessons about what it means to be human, about how communities survive not through competition but through cooperation, about how knowledge should be shared freely because hoarding it diminishes everyone, about how the measure of a person isn't what they know, but what they contribute. I learned that the hot spring we had found, that impossible pool of warmth in the endless cold, was a perfect metaphor for what community could be. A source of warmth in harsh times. A gathering place where life persisted despite impossible conditions. A reminder that beneath the frozen surface, warmth existed if you knew where to look for it. And I learned that I had been wrong about almost everything I thought I knew when I first arrived. Wrong about knowledge. Wrong about survival. Wrong about what mattered. Wrong about how to live. These people, this community that had taken me in and taught me and accepted me, they were my real education, my true teachers, the source of the deepest wisdom I had ever encountered. I'm an old man now, sitting by a fire in the community that became my home, watching my grandchildren play games that are really lessons in cooperation and survival. My hair is white. My hands are gnarled from decades of work in the cold. My face is weathered like everyone else's. But I'm home. Truly home. Not because I was born here, but because I chose here. Because I opened myself to change. Because I was willing to learn. A young person approaches me. A visitor from the South, much like I once was. They've heard stories about me. About the scholar who came north to study and stayed to live. They want to ask me questions about my research, my observations, my documentation of this culture. I didn't document this culture, I tell them gently. I lived it. I became part of it. I learned that the deepest truths can't be documented because they exist in actions and relationships, and the kind of knowledge that's written into your body and your heart. But you must have observations, they press. Insights that would be valuable to share with the academic world. I have one observation worth sharing, I reply. That every culture that survives in harsh conditions has wisdom worth learning. That knowledge comes in many forms, not all of which can be written down. That the measure of understanding is not how much you can explain, but how well you can participate. Here's what I learned at the hot spring all those years ago. Warmth exists even in the coldest places if you're humble enough to search for it. Life persists even when it seems impossible if you're wise enough to recognize it. And the deepest truths are always hidden beneath surfaces, waiting for those brave enough to look beyond the obvious. I hand them something. A carving made of walrus ivory that I've crafted over many winters. It depicts a hot spring with steam rising, with people gathered around its warmth. Take this, I tell them. Remember what it represents, that communities survive by sharing warmth. That knowledge is meant to be passed on, not hoarded. That true understanding comes from participation, not observation. That you have to be willing to change if you want to learn anything that matters. They accept the carving with reverent hands, and I see in their eyes the same thing that must have been in mine all those years ago. Curiosity, confusion, the beginning of understanding that the world is more complex than they thought. Will you teach me? They ask. I'll show you where to begin learning, I reply. The real teachers are the land, the people, the daily work of survival. I can introduce you, but they'll be the ones who teach you if you're humble enough to be taught. The fire crackles. Outside, the wind blows. Somewhere beneath the frozen ground, hot springs flow, carrying warmth through the coldest times, proving that life finds a way even in the harshest conditions. This is what I learned. This is what I pass on. Not data or observations or academic theories, but lived truth. Not information, but wisdom. Not knowledge about people, but knowledge with people. The hot spring taught me this. There is warmth in cold places. There is life in frozen landscapes. There is wisdom in unexpected sources. And the only way to truly understand any of this is to stop observing and start living. Where the snow never melted, the ancient hunters found the hot spring. And where the spring existed, community gathered. Where community gathered, knowledge was shared. Where knowledge was shared, wisdom grew. And wisdom, passed from generation to generation, ensures that we survive not just in body, but in spirit. Not just as individuals, but as something larger. Not just through the winter, but into whatever comes after. This is my story. The story of a scholar who learned to be something more than a scholar. Who found that the greatest discoveries come not from observing, but from becoming. Who learned that home is not where you're born, but where you're accepted, where you're valued, where you contribute and learn and grow. I pass this on to you who listen now, to you who may be searching for warmth in cold places, to you who may be looking for wisdom in unexpected sources, to you who may need to remember that beneath every frozen surface, life continues if you know how to find it. Listen, learn, participate, change, and discover what I discovered, that the greatest wisdom comes not from knowing but from being, not from studying but from living, not from observing but from becoming part of something larger than yourself. The spring flows, the warmth rises, the community endures, and the lesson remains constant across all generations. We survive together or not at all. If this story of transformation and unexpected wisdom moved you, please subscribe to keep these tales alive. Stories like these, about finding warmth in cold places, about communities that survive through cooperation, about the importance of humility in learning, need to be shared and remembered. Your support ensures they reach others who need to hear them. Thank you for journeying with James to the hot spring. May you find your own sources of warmth when the world seems frozen, and may you have the courage to become what you need to be, rather than remaining what you've always been.